All right, in 5.1 and in 5.2, we talked about how to properly gather a sample. We needed to know it was random, and we need to make sure it was not voluntary or not convenient. And we also we learned what proportions we should expect with margin of error and stuff like that. In this section, we learn about other things that can go wrong in the process of taking a sample. So first of all, we're talking about sampling errors right here. Errors caused by the act of taking a sample. They cause results to be different from the results of a census. Remember, a census is when we ask everybody that's of concern and not just our sample. So, if we wanted data about high school seniors, we'd have to ask every high school senior. That would be a census, instead of just taking a sample of high school seniors. So these are all sampling errors. They occur while you're taking the sample. A random sampling error is the deviation between the sample statistic and the population parameter caused by chance. This happens all the time. The margin of error in a confidence statement includes random sampling error. So every time you take a sample, your sample statistic is going to be slightly different from the actual population parameter. And that's where the margin of error and the confidence interval will come into play. So that one is accounted for. Another sampling error is bad sampling methods. And these include convenience samples and voluntary response samples. And the third sampling error is under coverage, when some groups of the population are left out. So if we were doing a study of all high school students and we did the survey during 8th hour, well, most of the seniors are gone at that point in our school. So that would be under coverage for the seniors because they weren't there to answer the questions. So we can leave out a certain group. Classic example of this is, I believe it was when Truman was being elected. They did a survey. I think this comes up later. They did a survey, and they called people, and they said the survey results were that the other guy was going to win by a landslide. But at that point in time, only the elite actually had phones. So they were really only surveying the rich people when they were trying to survey everybody. So that is under coverage, when you miss a group. Then we have non-sampling errors. They're not related to the act of doing the sample. They happen during the process afterwards. And this can even happen in a census. You have processing errors. This is where where data is entered incorrectly, or data is counted incorrectly. Any type of human error at this point. That's a processing error. Response error is when you don't get the responses you expected. If you're doing a phone poll, people are hanging up on you. You do an email survey, people don't respond to your email. If you're doing a face-to-face survey and they simply won't answer your question honestly or at all, that's a response error. So there's some kind of error in the response that you're getting. And then a non-response error is the failure to obtain data from an individual selected for a sample. So if you picked person number 95 to answer your question and you can't get them to answer your question for whatever reason, that is a non-response error. So examples would be almost the same as what I said before, so I'm going to change things. The non-response error would be not responding to the email, hanging up when somebody calls, not answering questions. The response error, sorry about that, would be they respond but not truthfully. So we've got people who are lying, or they don't know the answer but they say something anyway. That is the response error. All right, margin of error only covers random sampling error. We talked about that. Undercoverage, non-response, and other difficulties that can cause large bias are not covered by the margin of error. Okay. And then the wording of questions influence the results of a sample survey. These questions are all worded poorly for trying to get honest results. Okay. How much stock do you own? Well, are you talking to a Texas rancher or are you talking to a New York businessman? Are we talking about stocks like the stock market? Or are we talking about stock like how many cows? So you need to clarify that question. How do Americans feel about government help for the poor? Well, think about how you would answer that question. It didn't ask, how do you feel about government help for the poor? It said, how do Americans feel? I don't know how all Americans feel. I only know how I feel. And do you favor imposing the death penalty in order to reduce the rate of violent crime? This is a leading question because, yes, a lot of people want to reduce the rate of violent crime, but maybe they don't feel like the death penalty is the way to do it. But if you say no to that, then you're like, oh, you don't want to reduce crime. So that's a leading question. Okay, we're going to stop there with the notes, and I'm going to jump to your assignment for today. Okay, so we've got sampling and non-sampling errors here. Our first group of questions says a police officer is interested in the drug and alcohol use of high school students. He goes to a local high school and asks them the questions. So you're going to identify what type of error is happening here. So suppose the officer initially decides, so he's going to ask them questions face to face. So what's happening? Somebody's gonna lie. So what kind of error was it when somebody lied about the question? That was a response error. Okay, then suppose the officer grabs a random sample, but only does so from the freshman class. What type of error is he doing now? Well, that was a undercoverage because he's only getting freshman students when he really wanted the opinions of all high school students. For part C, the officer distributes anonymous surveys, that's good, to 100 random high school students, good, but only receives 12 of the surveys back. Which error happened here? So this would be the non-response error, where he's not getting results. Okay, you're going to do the same thing for number 2, and for 3, 4, and 5. Rewrite these questions so they don't lead people to a certain answer. All right, we don't want them leading. We want honest results. We don't want people to feel like they're being pushed to answer a certain way. And the questions need to be clear and specific. For number 4, I want you to think about, what if you don't work out? How do you answer that question? And for number 5, kind of the same thing. What if you don't have FaceTime? How do you answer that question? All right, and rewrite it in such a way that anybody could give you a clear and honest answer. All right, we'll talk about these at the end of class. So try to get them done before then, and I will see you at the meet.